we can conclude devil worship in France are the question of Lucifer, a record of things seen and heard in the secret societies according to the evidence of initiates by A.E.Waite, 1896, and the conclusion of the conclusion, perhaps. Now the mystic claims to be in possession of the higher law which transcends the ethical, from which the ethical derives, and to which it must be referred for its reason, that the lost secret of Freemasonry is concerned with the special applications of this higher law which connect with mysticism. We as mystics do hold that we can make evident in its proper time and place. Here and personally, I am concerned only with the comprehensive statement, in addition to its body of moral law, which is founded in the general conscience, are in the light of nature. Masonry has a body of symbolism, of which the source is not generally known, and by which it is identified with movements and modes of thought, and with evolutionary processes, having reference to regions already described as transcending the ethical world and concerned with the spiritual man. From every Masonic candidate, ignoring the schismatic and excommunicated sections, there is required a distinct attitude of mind towards the world without and the world within. He is required to believe in the existence of a supreme intelligence with which his essential nature corresponds in the possession of an indestructible principle of consciousness or understanding life. Beyond these doctrines, Masonry is wholly unsectarian. It recognizes no other dogma. It accredits no form of faith. Now mysticism is a body of ethical methods and processes on these same doctrines. Every man who believes in God and immortality is the raw material of a mystic. Every man who believes that there is a discoverable way to God is on the path of conscious mysticism. As this path has been pursued in all ages and nations by persons of widely divergent creeds, it is clear that however much mysticism has been identified with special spheres of religious thought and activity, it is independent of all. But while Masonry would appear to regard the evolution of our physical, intellectual, and moral nature as the best preparation for that larger existence which is included in its central doctrine, and would thus work inward from without, mysticism deems that the evolution of the spiritual man and the production of a human spirit at one with the divine constitute the missing condition requisite for the reconstruction of humanity, and would thus work outwards from within. Neither Mason nor mystic, however, can ignore either method. The one supplements the other, and seeing that the processes of mysticism are distinct from what is still a subject of derision under the name of transcendental phenomena, as they are wholly philosophical and interior, not to be appreciated by the senses, a secret experience within the depths and heights of our spiritual being, an institution which believes in God and immortality, and by the fact of immortality in the substance of an intimate relation between the spirit and God, will not look suspiciously on mysticism when it comes to understand it better. I have spoken of Masonic symbolism, and the method of instructions in Masonry is identical with that of mysticism. Both systems are veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbolism. The significance of this correspondence would not be measurably weakened were there no similarity in the typology, no trace of mystic influence in Masonic rite and legend. But there is a resemblance, and the types are often identical, though the accredited interpretation varies. See, they took all the men's orders and kind of put them, well, not all the men's orders, but they took the men's orders and put them all into one and said, well, let's make this available for all faiths. It's like, well, what's wrong with that? Providing people with something where they don't need to visit a psychologist. Masonry, as a fact, interprets the types which belong to our own science according to the criticism of ethics, and thus provides a prolegomena to mysticism. As ethics are a necessary introduction to the inner science of the soul, there is naturally a minor body of conventional typology which is tolerably exclusive to the craft. But the grand and universal emblems characteristic of a symbolical masonry, as distinct from the operative art, these are our own emblems: the all-seeing eye, the burning star, the rough and perfect ashlar, the point within a circle, the pentalpha, the seal of Solomon, the cubic stone. All these belong to the most lofty and arcane order of occult symbolism. But in mystic science, they illuminate more exalted zones of the heaven of mind. The rites, legends, and mysteries of the great fraternity are also full of mystical illusions, and admit the mystical interpretations in the same manner. But their evidential force is weaker because the ceremonial and legend in the hands of a skillful commentator can be made to take any shape and any complexion. It is otherwise with the symbols of the brotherhood, which were possessed by us before the historical appearance of Masonry. So also the Masonic reverence for certain numbers, which are apparently arbitrary in themselves, is in reality connected with the most recondite and curious system of mystic methodical philosophy, while in the high grades of Masonic dignity there is frequently a direct reference to mysticism. If we turn from these considerations and approach the historical connection through still undetermined problems which concern the origin of Masonry, we shall discern, not unfortunately a way clear to their solution, but a significant characteristic pervading every Masonic hypothesis, almost without exception, namely an instinctive desire to refer Masonry in its original form to sources that are probably mystic. In the fanciful and extravagant period when archaeology and comparative mythology were as yet in their childhood, this tendency was not less strong because it was most quite unconscious. To pass in review before us the chief institutions of antiquity with which Masonry was then said to be connected would be to sweep the whole field of transcendental history, and when we come to a more sober period, which recognized the better claim of the building guilds to explain the beginnings of the fraternity, the link with mysticism was not even then abandoned, and a splendid variant of the Dionysian dream took back the medieval architects to the portals of Eleusis and Thebes. When the history of Freemasonry becomes possible by the possession of materials, its chief philosophical interest centers on one country of Europe. There is no doubt that it exercised an immense influence upon France during the century of quakings and quickenings which gave birth to the Great Revolution, transformed civilization in the West, and inaugurated the modern era. Without being a political society, it was an instrument eminently adaptable to the subsurface determination of political movements. At a later date, it may have contributed to the formation of Germany, as it did certainly to the creation of Italy. But the point and center of Masonic history is France in the 18th century. That country also is mainly confined to the historical connection between Masonry and mystic science, for the revival of mysticism which originated in Germany at the close of the 18th century and thence passed over to England, founded its final field in France at the period in question. Now, the Illuminati grafted members from Freemasonry, kind of try to turn a little bit against Freemasonry, and in turning against the monarch's gut itself, overran and basically eliminated. And there's, some remnants in the museum. Is it a museum? What exactly is the place called where you can see the official records and such of the Illuminati that was taken down? But the Illuminati did play a role in the foundation of America too, but mostly it was the Freemasons in the formation of France and stuff too. But Bavaria, it got really strong in Bavaria. Very question. There Rosicrucianism reappeared, and there Anton Mesmer recovered the initial process of transcendental practice, and that the Marquis de Puysegur discovered clairvoyance. There Martinez de Pasquale instructed his disciples in the mysteries of ceremonial magic. There the illustrious Saint Martin, le philosophe inconnu, developed a special system of spiritual reconstruction. There alchemy flourished. There spiritual and political princes betook themselves to extravagant researches after an elixir of life. There also, as a consequence, rose up a line of magnificent impostors who posed as initiates of the occult sciences, as possessors of the grand secret and the great mastery. There, finally, under the influence of transcendental philosophy, emblematic Freemasonry took root and grew and flourished, developing 10,000 splendors of symbolic grades, of romantic legends, of sonorous names and titles. In a word, the mysticism of Europe concentrated its forces at Paris and Lyons, and all French mysticism gathered under the shadow of the square and compass, which is a symbol that goes back to the oldest use I see of this symbol in terms of secret orders that are given. Well, maybe the orders aren't secret, but what they do. Anyways, I told someone how to be initiated, ancient Egyptian style with a square and compass. Particular oil to use, that sort of thing. Anyways, to that is the center as the whole movement gravitated, and thence it worked. There is nothing to show that it endeavored to revolutionize Masonry in its own interest. The fraternity naturally attracted all the mystics to its ranks, and the development of the mystic degrees took place as the result of that attraction. By the year 1825, a variety of circumstances had combined to suspend transcendental activity, and the connections with Masonry ended. But at the present, revival of mystic thought is rapidly picking up the links of the broken chain. Secretly or unobtrusively, the spirit of transcendentalism is working within the fraternity, and the bogus question of Lucifer is simply a hostile and unscrupulous method of recognizing that fact. If Masonry and mysticism could be shown in the historical world to be separated by the great sea, the consanguinity of their intention would remain, which is more important than external affinity, and they are sisters by that bond, but they have not been so separated, and on either side there is no need to be ashamed of that connection. With all brethren of the fraternity, we also do believe in the resurrection of Hiram, and we regard the temple as an edifice immediately realizable, for we rebuild it in our hearts. The Luciferian doctrine of the doing one's own hero deeds, establishing one's own self. We also adore the grand architect and offer our intellectual homage to the divine cipher which is in the center of the symbolic star. And we believe that someday the Mason will recognize the mystic. He is the heir of the great names of antiquity, the philosophers and hierarchs, and the spiritual kings of old. He is of the line of Orpheus and Hermes, of the Essenes and the Magi, and all those illustrious systems and all those splendid names with which Masonry has ever claimed kindred, belonging absolutely to the history of mysticism. The end. Lux et nox, nox et